Hello, this is Robbie Mitchell here from Head in the Cloud Development. Today I'm going to walk you through creating a to-do list as a NetSuite single-page application. We'll be coding in TypeScript and the IDE we'll be using is VS Code, which is totally free. So first off, what is a single-page application? Well, let me show you something. In NetSuite, if you go to Help, and we're going to go to Suite Cloud Platform, SuiteScript, SuiteScript Developer Guide. Here you'll find a section on single-page applications. I'm not going to go through all this now, but if you are new to them, you might want to read through this. It offers some really good basic information. Basically, a single-page application is a web application or site that loads a single HTML page and dynamically updates that page when the user interacts with it. I'm very excited about these because they're the newest script type in NetSuite, and I think there's a lot of potential for doing great things with them. And until the last 6 months or so, these were only available if you requested special access to them. But now, anyone can deploy them as long as you have a valid SDN publisher ID. So the starting point of today's video is basically where we left off in my last video. In the last one, I created a very simple Hello World single-page application that didn't really do anything, but demonstrated the structure and deployment of the new project type. So today we're going to pick up from that and build a fully functional to-do list that interacts with NetSuite task records. It's going to perform full CRUD operations, creating, updating, and deleting tasks. So what do you need to know in order to master single-page applications in NetSuite? Well, first of all, I don't think anybody has mastered these yet. Certainly not me. This video is being done from the perspective of what I think of as your standard experienced SuiteScript developer, as opposed to a React front-end developer. Single-page applications use the new NetSuite UIF framework, which is a React-like framework. I personally found it very difficult to learn this framework, as I couldn't figure out how to apply my SuiteScript knowledge to fit into this React-like framework. Let me show you the documentation. And you can go to this URL in your account. I don't think there's a menu shortcut to it, but if you just add uiappscatalog.nl to your NetSuite URL, you should come to this UIF catalog. So there's some good basic stuff here for getting started that talks about the UIF being a React-like framework. I was really frustrated by these examples in the documentation because the very first thing mentioned in the first app tutorial is Redux, which I found to be really challenging. After banging my head against the wall and wearing myself out trying to use simpler state management techniques, I finally decided to just give up and submit to Redux. What I realized is, while it would be nice to have a super simple app that didn't need Redux, the reality is that you're going to create a single-page application because you need something that isn't super simple. In reality, NetSuite's UIF Redux truly is the best tool for the job here. So that being said, I'm definitely no authority on React or Redux. I'm just figuring it out as I go. So if I say something wrong, I'm sorry. Feel free to correct me in the comments. Or better yet, please contribute to the code project here on GitHub. I'll post a comment with a link to it afterwards. One last thing before we get into it. The way that I've taught myself Redux and a bit more about React in the last few months is by going through these two books by Pact Publishing. Learning React hooks was really interesting because if you don't know how they work, they kind of just look like weird magic in the code. But this book was actually really good, Learn React Hooks by Daniel Bugle, and it has really good examples with using Redux as well. In fact, this whole to-do app that we're going to build today is based on what you do in chapter 12 of that book. And after that book, I still didn't feel like I knew Redux super well, so I got this Learning Redux book, also by Daniel Bugle, which really boils it down to just a few fundamental concepts and really helps make it simple. So thank you, Daniel. Also here, I've just listed a couple of free tutorials that you can look through if you want to learn more about these topics. Okay, enough talking. Let's get into single-page applications in NetSuite. So before we get to the code, let me show you how to find single-page applications in your NetSuite. You may have noticed that under Customization and Scripting, there's now a single-page applications menu. You'll probably see a blank page, but I've got quite a few here in my test account. So I'm going to show you here what we're going to build today. So this is what we're going to build today. It's a very simple task to-do list where you can create new tasks and you can check completed tasks off the list. You can filter to active or completed ones only, and you can also delete tasks. These all link to actual task records in NetSuite. So if this looks interesting to you, then let's get to it. So since I did the previous tutorial using WebStorm, this time I'm going to use VS Code, just to show that you can use either one. So I'm going to download the code from the Hello World single-page application from my last video here, basically to just copy and paste some boilerplate code. And I also want to mention that if you haven't looked at it yet, the Oracle NetSuite Suite Cloud Samples repository on GitHub has some pretty good single-page application samples. The Airport 360 is the really interesting one that they showed at SuiteWorld, and then there are some more basic ones here as well. So most of what I have in my Hello World, I copied and pasted from these references. So I've just downloaded the Hello World from GitHub, and I'm just going to open it up on my other screen so I can copy and paste some things in. And here in VS Code, I already have the SDF plugin installed, so make sure you have that set up as well. I'm not going to walk through that. So step one here is to create a new Suite app. And I'll just mention, in the video you'll see me going to the View command palette a lot to access the Suite Cloud plugin modules here. You're welcome to use the keyboard shortcuts to do it, but I'm going to use the menu mainly so you can see what I'm clicking on and see what I'm doing a bit more visually. So I'm going to do Create Project. I'm going to go into Documents and do New Folder. We'll call it HITC Spa To Do Video. I'm just going to click Open. Now I have to choose Suite App Project here. So the project name can be human readable, so I'm going to say HITC To-Do List Spa Video. For the publisher ID, I'm going to use mine. It's com.headinthecloud dev. The project ID has to be like all one word lowercase. So I'm going to call it HITC To-Do List Video. Project version is 1.0.0. Do I want to include unit testing? No. Say this video, this window. So the first thing you'll probably need to do is set up your account access. So I've already linked VS Code to my developer account, so I'm just going to choose my release preview account here for NetSuite 2025.1. Okay, so here we are with our blank Suite app. First, let's add our package.json and tsconfig.json. So again, I'm going to copy from my other project, and I'm just going to change the name of it to do list spa video. So the important thing here is that we've got 2025.1 of our NetSuite types, NetSuite UIF types 5.0.0, and a handful of other things that the module uses. Let's do tsconfig next. I'm just going to copy and paste this from my Hello World. Okay, and then of course let's go ahead and run npm install to install these modules. Oops, it looks like I put them in my source folder. I actually want them out at the project root level, so just drag and drop them out here. Okay, let's try npm install again. I'm sure that won't be the last mistake I make in this video. Okay, that worked well. The other file we need to copy and paste in is our gulpfile.mjs. So I'm just going to do a new file here. And just copy and paste that from Hello World. Okay, now let's create our single page application object XML file. So in the objects folder, we'll make a new file. We'll call it cust spa, HITC spa to do list video.xml. And for the main content, again, I'm going to copy and paste in from my Hello World app, and then we're going to change a few things. First, let's change the name to match the file name. And it's important to note this can be a maximum of 40 characters, so it looks like it's only 32 characters, so we're okay. HITC SPA to-do list video. Okay. And for the name of it, we'll set this to HITC to-do list video. For the description, I'm going to say that it's based loosely on chapter 12 of the Learn React Hooks book. The URL, let's do HITC to-do list video. And for the folder structure here, let's just make sure that this matches what we've got set in our manifest as the project name. So project ID actually is HITC to-do list video. So I'm just going to copy that and replace test spa with that. And then the other thing, this hello world folder, that's going to be in the source code. Instead of saying hello world, let's just change that to single page application, just spa. I'll change that on all these. Okay, so from here, a good next step is to create this client script and server script in this assets folder. So notice your file paths here. This means we need a Suite app folder, a project folder, and a spa folder within source. We can actually create them all in one step by copying and pasting this. So let's try that. I'll do new folder. Make this a bit wider. Okay, yeah, it looks like it worked. So now we can create our spa server.ts file. And again, I'm just going to copy and paste in the content from the Hello World app. To be honest, I don't actually know the purpose of this file yet. I wonder if maybe it'll serve as like a server-side place where you can do data lookups and things that the client user might not have permission to do. But I don't think there are any examples of doing that yet. But at least I can show how to do an execution log. So next, let's create our spa client.tsx file. And again, I'll copy and paste in the stuff from Hello World. But let's pause and look at this for a second. Notice that on lines 1 and 7, we mentioned the Hello World component. That's obviously what we created in the first video, but for this, let's just change it to app. That's what we're going to call it in this video. And it's complaining because it doesn't exist yet, but that's obvious. So now a quick word about this assets folder that the XML file references. Even though we're not using any images or anything like that in this project, I think we have to have this, otherwise we're going to get a build error when we compile. So the simplest thing I've found to do is just create an assets folder and put some random image in it. So let's do that here. I'm going to do new folder, assets, and I'm just going to paste, if I can figure out how, I'm going to just drop an image into here. So this is Johnny. Johnny likes to sit outside my office and watch me code. So he's going to serve as our image. Okay, last but not least, we can finally create our app.tsx file. And to start with, let's just copy and paste in our Hello World functional component. Except we'll go ahead and change the name of it to just app. And before we go any further, let's go ahead and compile and upload our code to make sure we haven't broken anything yet. Now, I always say, if I can teach you one thing about NetSuite development, it's to do things iteratively. In other words, code a little bit and test often. Don't spend hours writing code hoping it's going to work, otherwise you're likely to spend even longer debugging it to try to figure out what went wrong. It's much better to keep your code in a working state so that if one thing does go wrong, you'll know exactly what it is. So to build this, we need to run npm run bundle. Now let's see if I've missed anything. Okay, I think this might have failed because they've actually updated the UIF module since the first video. Looks like now there's at least a version 7.0.1. So let's try installing that instead and see if that fixes it. Okay, my errors went away, so let's see if I can run bundle now. It still says it couldn't find app. So what did I get wrong here? Oh duh, I forgot to change this from hello world to app. Silly me. Okay. Now let's see if it'll compile. See what I mean? One thing is always broken. Okay. So it compiled successfully, and before we can deploy it, there's one important thing we need to do. We just need to add our dependencies to the manifest. So we can do view, command palette, add dependency references to the manifest. By the way, if you don't see what I see here when you just click on command palette, just type in SuiteCloud, and you'll see all the options there. Okay, so that should have added server-side scripting. Yep, that's the only required thing here. So now we should be able to deploy this. And when you click on deploy, make sure not to miss the next little pop-up. Okay, so it's doing my authorization. Click continue there. Okay, it says it's good. Make sure not to miss this little pop-up about applying installation preferences. I don't think it matters for this. I'm just going to say no. Okay, it says something went wrong. See details. Oh, look at that. It says the script ID must not exceed 28 characters. Okay, fine. Right now it's 32. I'm just going to cut off 4 characters here. And it does have to match what we have here. Okay, let's try that. Deploy it again. Okay, it says it deployed. So let's check in NetSuite. Go to our single page applications list. And here it is, to-do list video. So if I open this, it just says hello world. Okay, great. We haven't broken it yet, but we will. So now it's time to change this from hello world app into to-do list with state management. Let's look at the documentation again for just a minute. So in order to turn this into this, we need to know what components to use. And figuring out what components to use here is something that is going to take you some good old research, experimentation, and trial and error. One great reference, again, is the examples that Oracle has published. You can see what components they use to do things. You can also go to the studio and try things out for yourself. Let's see what a stack panel looks like. Okay. Let me offer you one piece of advice, though, from what I've learned so far. Please, as much as you can, resist the urge to use simple HTML elements, especially inputs and buttons. Always, whenever possible, use the UIF components instead. I don't quite understand why, but lots of times plain HTML just doesn't work in single-page applications. One exception I've found is that using divs seems to be usually pretty safe. That being said, this stack panel here is what we're going to use for our to-do list, with a few stack panel items within it. So let's set up some placeholders here in VS Code. And close the other things. So let's get rid of this content panel and replace it with a stack panel. We'll need to import this from the UIF component. So in our stack panel, let's add stack panel items. We'll include a header, an add to do placeholder, and a to-do list placeholder, and finally a filters placeholder. Now let's just use this heading component that we already have here. Oh, sorry, it's not stack panel item, it's stack panel dot item. Okay, let's copy and paste this a few times. So we've got our header, we're going to have a add new to do, and we're going to have a to-do list. Finally, at the bottom, we're going to have a filters section. Now, yep, you guessed it. Let's build and upload and test. Okay, it deployed. So now if I refresh, well, this doesn't look very good, does it? That's pretty ugly. Let's look at the documentation of a stack panel for a minute and see if we can improve this. Okay, here's some stuff about orientation. And here's alignment. What we'll do is we'll add a start alignment and a vertical orientation. And I think that'll do nicely for what we want. So the way we do that is we say alignment stack panel dot alignment. Here the IntelliSense really comes into handy. Start and orientation stack orientation dot vertical. All right, let's try this. Okay, that looks much better. Let's run with this. So now it's time to create our first component. And we're going to start super simple. We're going to turn this first heading into a header component. So in our SPA folder, let's create a header.tsx file. So we're going to import the heading from UIF components. And then we're just going to export a functional header component here. And all it is a heading element of type page title. And it's just going to say task list. So now let's import that into our app. And then let's replace this first heading with our header. And yep, we'll build and upload this test. You're going to get really fast at building and upload. That's our new page header. Okay, now let's move on to something a little more interesting. Now let's start on our to-do item component. This is going to be how a single to-do shows in the list. So let's create a to-do item.tsx file. Let's just start by exporting our to-do item component. It's going to have some props. This is the data passed in for the to-do item. And you may have seen me use jsx.element a couple of times already. That's what these components are from a TypeScript perspective. So what we can do is import JSX from UIF. This is from the core module. And for our to-do item, we're going to need a couple of components. We're going to use a button and a checkbox from UIF components. Oh, and the B in checkbox needs to be capitalized. To make TypeScript happy, let's just start by returning a div. And if you recall, the way we're going to display each to-do item is basically as a checkbox with a to-do title next to it. So let's do a checkbox here. But now let's think about the properties of an individual to-do, because we need to define what that looks like here for this props parameter that the component uses. What we can do here is create an interface called iToDo, and we'll export it because we're going to use it in other components as well. And what we can say is that each to-do is going to have a title, it's a string, a completed flag, which is Boolean, and an ID, which is a string. That's it. So now we can use this here on line 4 to say that props is a single iToDo. That means to make this component, we're going to need a title, a completed flag, and an ID. So then in our checkbox, what we can do is we can set the checked value to whether or not it's completed or not. So that means it'll be checked if it's completed and unchecked if it's not completed. And we can set the label of the checkbox to the title of the to-do. And for the checkbox's action, when someone clicks on it, we need a handle toggle function. So let's define that here. And in the documentation, you'll see that the toggle event has a Boolean value, a previous value, and something called the reason, which is going to be important later. Returns a void. Now inside this function, for now, let's just log these values that are passed in. Okay, now we also want to have a delete button out to the right of the to-do. And for this button, we're actually going to import the system icons from the core module so that we can use an icon on the button. You can see all the options here. Why don't we use delete? Sounds appropriate. And then we need an action, a handle remove function for the delete button. So let's declare this function here as well. And again, for now, let's just log that someone has clicked this. So now, in order to see our to-do items, we also need to make a very simple to-do list component. So let's start that. We'll go ahead and initialize our component. And now what we're going to need in our to-do list is our to-do items. We're going to need the interface and the component itself. And for our very first version of this, we're just going to manually code in a couple of to-dos here. So they're objects with a title. Create placeholder components. Completed, true, ID 1. And a second one, implement state management. Completed, false, ID 2. And now to make our list of to-do items, we're going to use the array.map function on this to-dos array that we have. Basically, to turn this object into a to-do item component. So this says to pass in the properties of this object as the props for the to-do item component. some spacing here. And then for our return, we're just going to wrap this in a div. And that's our to-do list. Okay. So now what we need to do is put this to-do list into our app. So we'll import it here. And just replace this placeholder with the to-do list. Okay, then let's build and upload. Making good progress. All right, there's our to-dos. And if we want to check our logs, we can see our handle toggle and our delete are doing what we have told them to do so far. So that is great. Okay, I've put this off as long as I could, but I'm afraid it's time to talk about state management and how we're going to implement Redux in this to-do list app. Let's check the documentation. It's unfortunately under Advanced Guides. We'll go to State Management. Now this documentation here is actually pretty good, but maybe not good enough, as I really struggled to wrap my head around this without a guide. So my hope here is that this video will guide you average SuiteScript developers through the basics of using Redux here for state management. The good news is that Redux is actually fundamentally very simple. It's really just based on a few simple principles. Namely, the application state itself is immutable. You can't change it directly. There's a store, which is the single source of truth for the application state. There are a list of specific actions that define what can happen to the state. And you'll have one or more reducer functions. These are pure functions that take the state, apply an action to it, and return a new state. If you're not familiar with the term pure function, it basically means that given the same input, it will always return the same output. There are no side effects in a reducer. That's really it. So we're going to walk through this now piece by piece. We're going to start by creating our list of actions, which in the documentation looks like this. There's basically an enumeration of actions and then a list of action functions or factory methods to construct actions. Let me show you what that looks like. We're going to create an actions.ts file. And our application is going to have 5 actions. We're going to define this as an action type object. 5 actions we're going to have are add to do. We're going to use symbols for these. We're going to have fetch to do. We're going to have toggle to do. Remove to do. And filter to do. I forgot a quote here. Okay. And again, let me just add a comment to say what this is. This is a list of possible actions. The reducer takes a state, applies one of these actions, and returns a new state. And then the second thing we need to have here is our list of action creator functions. Action creator functions handle possible side effects, such as CRUD operations, so that the reducer function can be pure. So we'll put these functions in another action object. So let's go ahead and fill in some of the very basics here. First, we need an add to do function with the title parameter. So eventually this is going to be where we're creating the NetSuite task record. But we're not going to worry about that just yet. Right now we're just going to use a hard-coded ID of 0. And then the output of the function is the action type, the ID, and the title as an object, like this. Pretty simple, right? This might not mean much yet, but you'll see how it all fits together in a few minutes when we go through the reducers. So second, we're going to need a fetch to do function. Make sure to add a comma. So eventually this is where we'll be looking up the tasks from NetSuite, but for now, let's actually just take our hard-coded to-dos that we put here, and we'll put them here. For the moment, let's not worry about this type. We're not going to bother importing it. But then we'll return the same object style as above. Third, we need a function for toggling the completed status of the to-dos. It's just going to take an ID of a to-do to toggle. This will be where we update the task status in NetSuite. But for now, we're just going to return type action type.toggle to do and the ID. Fourth, we need a function to remove a to-do by ID. This will be where we delete the task record in NetSuite. For now, we're just going to return an object. And finally, we need a function for filtering to-dos. This one actually has no side effects. It just returns the object. Okay, so now let's get just a little start on our reducer. We'll create a reducers.ts file here. So again, reducers take a state, apply an action, and return a new state. Very simple. So let's make an app_reducer function that takes a state, applies any action, and returns a new object. Now this is very important. Notice that we're not changing the state. We're returning a new object composed of the old state right now. Now before we go any farther, let's switch over to our app component. It's time to go ahead and set up our store. So here we are. We need to go ahead and set up our store and define our initial state. First, we have a few things to import. From the core module, let's import store, use effect, use memo, and use state. Now let's define what our initial state is. Our initial state is an object with an empty to-dos array and a filter set to show all to-dos. And now to help ourselves from having to repeat this, let's go ahead and define an interface for this state. We'll call it iAppState. Go ahead and export it because we know we're going to need it in other modules. And like we said, it's just an array of to-dos. We'll need to import this interface. and a filter that's a string. And let's specify that that's what this is. Okay. Now we're going to add a state hook, which is going to store our Redux state. And I have to warn you, again, if you haven't used hooks before, this might look a bit like magic. I do recommend you read about them in the documentation, or get the Learn React Hooks book that I mentioned earlier. It really is worth the read. Next, we're going to create our store, which you can probably actually copy from the documentation here. Then we just need to import our reducer. And set the reducer of the store to our reducer. Finally, under the store, we define an effect hook in order to keep the state hook in sync with the Redux store state. Okay, now that we have all this in place and we know what our initial state is, let's go back in and fill a little bit more detail in on our reducers. Let's go ahead and import our action type list, our iToDo interface, and our app state interface. So now we know what our state's going to be. And for reducers, the common approach is to split the reducer up to handle separate pieces of the state. So for ours, we know that the new state must have to-dos and a filter. So what we can do is define a filter reducer that returns a string and a to-dos reducer that returns an array of to-dos. Something like this. And then the way we plug them in here is, we know when we're returning our new state, it needs to have to-dos. So we'll use our to-dos reducer. We'll pass in the to-dos from the current state and the action to perform, and that'll give us back our new to-dos for our new state. And the same with the filter. Use the filter reducer with the current state filter and the action to apply. And what that means is, for our filter reducer, the state that we're passing in is just the string, and the action is going to be the symbol type and the new filter string. Put a comment here just to remind ourselves. So then in the filter reducer, we'll say if action.type is action_type.filter to do. We're just going to return the new filter. Otherwise, we return the current state. And it looks like I have a typo in my interface. String should not be capitalized. Let's fix that. Okay. So now for the to-dos reducer, We know that state is going to be an array of I to-dos, but we're not quite so sure what the action is going to be because it could be creating, fetching, toggling, or removing. So we can define that, but we'll use question marks to say they could be optional. It might have a title. It might have an ID. Or it might be a list of to-dos. And you could break this down further if you really wanted to be sure. But for us, we're going to use a switch statement here. So we can handle each action type separately. So one very important thing I want to say here, every reducer should have a fallback section that just returns the state passed in, just like what we have here on line 19. So we'll always make sure to have a default section that just returns the state. Now we'll do our case action type.fetch to-dos. So if our action is that we've just done a fetch, then we're going to return that list of to-dos for our new state. And then if our action is that if we've just created a to-do, we're going to create an object for that and add it into our to-dos array. So keep in mind, what happens here is going to happen right after any side effects from our action creator functions. So in other words, by the time we get here, the task will have already been created in NetSuite. What we're doing here is just all about managing the app state. So to return our array of to-dos, we just want to add the new to-do to the old to-dos. Now for the toggle action. What we need to do is find the to-do that we're toggling in the array of to-dos and basically just flip the completed status on it. We're going to use the array.map method for this. And honestly, I'm really not in love with this format of this method. We're basically iterating through them and creating a new array just with the completed status reversed on the one selected. The code is ugly but efficient. Finally, for remove to-do, we're going to do something similar, but here we're just going to filter the array to all the elements except for the one with the ID matching the one that we've just said to delete, like this. Again, I think there are much clearer ways of coding this, but this is very effective. And that, my friends, is how we make a good reducer. Now to see it in action, let's first add in a call to the fetch to-dos action in our app. First we need to import our actions list. Then we're going to use the use effect hook again to dispatch the fetch to-do action. Just include a log here so we can see when that happens. So here we're just dispatching the fetch action using the creator function with our store. So the last thing we need to do is update our to-do list to use the to-dos from the store. And I'll show you the documentation for this in a sec, but the way we're going to do that is by using the useSelector hook from UIF core. So then where we had our to-dos hard-coded before, now we're going to get them from the state. And so we can say what our state is here. Let's import our app state interface. So basically this gives us access to the store and we're extracting the to-dos from the app state. Last but not least, we need to go back to our app and wrap this whole stack panel in a store provider component. Okay, now let's build and test this. And after we upload it and refresh, we should see no visual difference from before. Oh, sorry, one important thing, we should be starting this with a new array here. Okay, now that was actually the hardest part. It's all downhill from here. Before we move on, let me just show you that documentation on the useSelector hook. So if we go to hooks, you can look at useSelector. Yeah, it basically just extracts the state from the store based on a given selector. So looking back at our app, the next thing we need to do is make this add to do component. Before we do, let me just show you one other thing in the documentation. If you're familiar with React, you might be familiar with using virtual DOM fragments. Well, in UIF, we also have the idea of a VDOM fragment. So we're going to use this a little bit here. So let's start our add to do component. We'll start off by importing JSX and VDOM from the UIF core. And the components that our add to do is going to use are a button and a text box. So we'll go ahead and import those too. Now we'll start our functional component. And we'll start by returning a VDOM fragment with a div 300 pixels wide. And in the div, let's put a text box with a placeholder and a button that says add. Okay, now let's add this to our app component and we'll do a quick test. We'll replace our placeholder down here. And let's see how it looks. Okay, that works, but now let's hook it up to our state management. To do this, we're going to need to import useState and useDispatch, as well as our actions enumeration. So first, we're going to use the state hook to keep track of what the user has entered in the box. We'll set up a handle input function here that effectively passes the text entered through the state every time a user changes it. That way it's ready when they click add. And in the documentation, you can see the text box text change arguments. Next, we'll create the handle add function that runs whenever the user clicks the add button. So when the user clicks add, we need to dispatch the add to do action, which means we need the useDispatch hook here to link back to our application state. I'll show you this in the documentation in a couple of minutes. So if there is input, we'll call add to do, and we'll send it that input. And then we'll clear the input of the text box so they can add another one. Okay, let's upload and test this. Okay. So as you can see, we're making good progress. But for some reason, clearing the input field didn't work here. So let's take a quick look at that. Oh right, I forgot to say that the text of the text box should be our input. That's okay, I don't need to retest that. I know that'll work. Let's keep going here. Before we move on to the filters section, let's go back and hook up the toggle checkbox and the delete button here to our state management. And in case you're curious, let me show you the useDispatch hook here, because we're going to use it again. Okay, there it is. Now let's go implement it in our to-do item. So to do this, we need to import the useDispatch hook and our actions enum. Then we'll simply dispatch our toggle action in the handle toggle function and the remove action. So let's bring on our dispatch here. And then we'll add in our actions. For both of them, we just pass in the ID of the to item that they're clicking on. Okay, quick upload and test. So now I should be able to add things here. So something isn't quite working right. And I knew this was going to happen, and I know the solution. So let me show you that now. The problem is that this handle toggle event is running, but it seems like every time the component refreshes. To fix this, we can actually use this event reason parameter and say if it's not a click, then return. Get rid of that log too. So to do that, we can say if event.reason is not equal to an actual click, then return. Okay, let's see if that makes it better. If you know why this is actually happening, feel free to comment, but at least this is a good way to handle it. Okay. So now it only runs when I actually click the toggle. And if I click delete, that works too. So great. Now we can finally implement this filter section here at the bottom. So let's create our ToDoFilter.tsx file. For now, let's just import JSX. Now this component is going to be a little different because it's actually two components in one. Our ToDoFilter component is going to show 3 filter options, each separated by a slash. What that means is that we need another individual ToDoFilterItem component here. Each ToDoFilterItem just has a name. So for our ToDoFilter component, it's just going to be a div with 3 filters in it, and we'll add a span for a label. So we're going to have all, active, and completed. And there shouldn't be a slash after the last one. To start with, for our ToDoFilterItem, let's just return a span with the filter name. Now let's add this component to our app and make sure we haven't broken anything yet. We'll replace our placeholder down here with our new ToDoFilter. And we'll upload and test. Okay. Yeah, that's generally what it should look like. But now let's make it prettier and let's make it work. So now let's import useDispatch, useSelector, along with our actions enum. So in the ToDoFilterItem, now we'll initialize our dispatch, and then let's extract the current filter from the state. Again, let's bring in our app state so we are clear on what that is. That way we know that we're just extracting the filter string, which is the currently selected filter. Now let's add in the styling. That's nice and easy. I'm going to make them look like hyperlinks. And we'll bold the currently selected filter. We'll plug that in on the span. Like that. And then what we need is a handle filter function that runs when a user clicks on these. So here we'll say handle filter. And then let's declare that function here. So all we need to do here is dispatch the filter action with the name of the filter that the user clicked on. Let's log what it is too. And that should apply the new filter. So now before this will actually work, we also need to update our to-do list component to actually apply the filter set on the state. Let's do that now. To do that, we're going to again use the useSelector hook to read the filter from the state. Then we're going to create an array of filtered to-dos by applying this filter to the full list of to-dos. We're going to use the useMemo hook to memoize the result of this calculation. So if the filter is set to active, we're going to filter to show only incomplete tasks. Otherwise, if the filter is set to completed, again we'll filter to only completed tasks. And the default is the same as for when the all filter is selected, we'll show everything. Now for our list of to-dos, let's just use our filtered list of to-dos. So now let's upload and test this. I think something went wrong. What did I do wrong here? Oh duh, we need to pass in the filter and the to-dos into our memoize function, like this. That should fix it. Let's try that. Good thing we're coding iteratively. Okay. So yeah, our filter works exactly correct now. So that is great. So that's it for our dummy data implementation here. Now what you've all been waiting for, let's hook this up to actual NetSuite record data. And if we've done things right, this next part is actually going to be pretty darn easy. So let me show you my tasks. So I just have a few in NetSuite. But let's see if we can get this working with these task records. So let's go to our actions.ts file. So remember how we put these to-do comments here? Well, it's time to implement these. To start with, we're going to create an api.ts file. This is going to handle all our calls to NetSuite. So let's import the iToDo interface as well as the SuiteScript query, record, and runtime modules. We'll use these in just a minute. And when we're importing SuiteScript modules, we have to do it in this from style that you'll see here. And to be clear, this video is again from the perspective of an experienced SuiteScript developer, so I'm expecting that you'll be familiar with these API modules. If you're not, there are plenty of videos out there that can explain them, but I don't want to go into detail on the SuiteScript functions here because our goal is learning single-page applications. And I think it makes sense here to start with our fetching action to show existing tasks. So let's declare an async function, fetch APIs to do, and this is going to return a promise with an array of to-dos. So we can declare our array like this and then return it. Oops. And now to get the existing tasks, we'll use SuiteQL to do a query for my tasks. So I'm going to select a few fields from a task record where I'm the assignee. And here's how we can parse the task query response into a TypeScript array. And then we'll iterate through the query results and add them to our array as to-do objects. Okay, now let me show you how to use this back in our action creator function. Here's how we do it. And we need to add an import for our API. So as you can see, asynchronous action creators return a function that will dispatch actions at a later time, basically whenever the API promise finishes. So shall we test it? Yeah, I think so. Actually, I need to make sure to save this. I'm too used to WebStorm that auto-saves automatically. So now I should see my actual tasks. Yeah, That looks like my task records. And if I look in the logs, I can see their IDs. So great. So far, so good. Let's continue building out the API. Next, let's make the add to do API function. Pretty simple, right? Now let's hook it into our action creator. As you can see, this is becoming very straightforward quickly. Let's upload and test this. Now you might notice a short delay here. That's because we're waiting for the promise to complete before we add it to the state. And if we refresh, we should see my new task there again. Yeah, there it is. Okay, now let's go ahead and implement our function for updating the status of a task. And in this one, we need to do a query to find out what the current status is so we know how to update it. You could avoid this if you pass in the new value from the handle toggle function. But there's multiple ways of doing this. So now we'll simply update the status of the task record accordingly. Oops. Here we'll log when the record update finishes. Let's build in an error handler in case it fails for any reason. I'm not sure if there's a more UIF-friendly way of doing this. There probably is, but I'm not going to go into that now. Now let's plug this into our action creator. And I'm just going to show you now that you don't have to use this await format. You can actually just use the regular promise.then format. So when the promise finishes, then dispatch the action. And finally, before we test, let's go ahead and implement our API delete task function. This one's very short and sweet. And again, to show you another option, you don't actually have to wait for your promises to complete. What I mean is you can do this. So here we're not actually waiting for the task to be deleted. We're just starting the delete operation, kind of assuming it will be, and then we're dispatching the remove action to remove it from the state immediately. Probably not the best idea for a real-life app, but it's good to know you have this option. And if you do want to wait for it, just do the same thing that we did above. So let's go ahead and do one final test. So if I mark some of these complete, I got an error. Oh, haha, obvious typo. Sorry. Let's fix that. Okay, let's build and upload again. Okay, for real this time. Final test. Okay, so updating works. And deleting works. So if I reload the page, I should only see those 3 tasks. Yes, very good. Okay, so this concludes our tutorial on creating single-page applications in TypeScript. Please get in touch if you have any questions or feedback, or if you'd like to hire us to build you a single-page application. Otherwise, we'll see you at Sweet World. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.